thank you for the opportunity to present today at the America's Future Series National Security Virtual Summit. My name is Bryn Woolacott. I'm the National Security Advisor to Congressman Ken Calvert. I will be moderating today's session on strengthening the defense industrial base. I'm joined today by Congressman Ken Calvert of California's 41st Congressional District, the chairman of the House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, and my boss, and the Honorable Ellen Lord, former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, former CEO of Textron Systems, and currently serving on many boards and advisories. Thank you both for being with me here today. America's military strength is largely derived from the strength of our defense industrial base, which is currently challenged to keep pace with an uptick in demand on existing programs while simultaneously addressing the need for new technology and innovation to get after future challenges. Conversations about defense innovation are a staple in defense conferences as a way to get after this challenge. But it feels like we keep having the same conversation where everyone acknowledges how important innovation is, but actually translating that into field capability is slow. There have been some positive developments in recent years that we'll discuss later in the conversation, but I want to start by addressing why you both think innovation is so important and what the problems are that you believe innovation will solve that traditional development is unable to achieve. Ms. Lord, I'm interested in your perspective from your time in industry, the department, and your work today. What defense challenges do you think will be uniquely addressed through innovation?
Thank you, Bryn. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak about this. I believe we have a unique situation today where the pace of technological innovation is accelerating rapidly, while we have geopolitical threats emerging in many, many places. And our systems traditionally within the Department of Defense are deliberative and work through a process that takes a bit of time. However, here we have strategic competitors who have civil-military fusion and make decisions very, very quickly. So our challenge is really to embrace the U.S. innovation culture and translate that into fielding capability quickly, really for two reasons. We obviously always want to have overmatch from a warfighting point of view, but more importantly, we need to begin with deterrence, and it's only deterrence through strength and innovative warfighting capability, all the way from gray zone warfare to full kinetic is very important.
Great. And Congressman Calvert, you've been a leader on this conversation in Congress. Why do you think innovation is the solution to our defense challenges?
Right. Well, thank you for moderating, Bryn, and thank you, Ellen, for doing this. And obviously, we have a strong agreement. You did a great job when you were at the Pentagon trying to change the culture there, which needs to be changed, to innovate, to bring on new technologies as quickly as possible, which has not happened as quickly as we would both like to see. As you know, the bureaucracy, or whatever you want to call it there, is slow to move, and we need to change that, because as you know, in the private sector, you don't have any choice but to move rapidly in order to keep a competitive advantage. The same thing should apply to the Department of Defense. We need to keep a competitive advantage to our adversaries. Obviously, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, none of them have to worry about continuing resolutions, or U.S. Congresses for that matter. And so they can direct their funds rapidly, and you know, their R&D budgets are, a lot of it is stealing from us and stealing from our private technology companies. And so we have to work with them to do the right thing to help the United States in our common defense, and to get these technologies online as rapidly as possible, and to bypass the unfortunate procurement process in the department, which takes too long.
And has this conversation changed in Congress at all while you've been serving in your current role or previous roles in terms of the need to implement more innovation in the department?
Yes, we're seeing change, not as quick as we would like, and obviously with our colleagues in the Senate that are becoming better understanding of the situation we're in. Obviously the Pentagon with what Kath Hicks is trying to do with the replicator program and trying to bring new capabilities to the field. What we've already done with APFIT, what we've done with the Office of Strategic Capital, what we've done with DUI and bringing Doug Beck in from the private sector, all of that is moving us in the right direction, and we need to encourage it and yet move faster.
Absolutely. And speaking of moving faster, the Commission on Defense Innovation Adoption has an interim report that identifies long timelines as a top challenge facing innovative companies that seek to work with the Department of Defense. it's apparent that the private sector consistently goes faster than the department. So when we talk about incorporating innovative technologies, there can often be a logistical disconnect between an innovative company and the Department of Defense that can impede incorporation of that innovation. So Congressman Calvert, what do you think is the source of these delays and the department's slow pace?
It didn't happen overnight. The bureaucracies have built up over a period of time. And so these barriers with senior managers and others to protect, I guess, their turf has created these unfortunate stoppages of these technologies that we're trying to get out there. I think that AppFit, for instance, that Heidi Shue is running that program, is doing a good job, where we're identifying technologies and getting them to a record of decision very rapidly, and getting those fielded in months rather than years. And I think with Doug Beck there, also with DUI, we're hoping to give him a substantial chunk of change here in this FY24 bill, which gives him some flexibility to move money. It's colorless, it can move around, and from R&D to procurement, which will be very helpful and begin the process of change, radical change within the department.
And how do you think the congressional appropriations process can impact these timelines? And what do you think industry should understand about that when they seek to work with the military?
Well, it's frustrating to members of Congress and the appropriations process. It's taken too long to get to where we're at today, but we're beginning to get the negotiations going to get to a defense bill. I'm hoping that we'll have that complete here soon and get it across both the House and the Senate and signed by the President. But we have to pass all 12 appropriation bills under the scenario we're operating under, or we have to take a 1% cut off FY23 on the defense appropriation bill, which would be devastating. So we do not want that to happen. And I don't believe it will, and we're working to make sure that doesn't happen.
Great. And Ms. Lord, where do you see the biggest delays in capability development and fielding, and how does that impact the defense industrial base?
Getting dollars on contract is what the big delay is, and you don't build capacity and capability until dollars flow. So it's great to do prototypes, it's great to do experiments, demonstrations, but that needs to translate into actual programs of record or long-term funding. So one of the largest problems is with the small businesses, where most of the innovation takes place these days, and they might get a phase 1, phase 2 small business innovation research grant, but then when they get to phase 3, it gets much tougher, and then to continue funding is a problem. And as the Congressman alluded to, if you're a small business, you need to make payroll every week. You can't be told, just hold on, 18 months from now we'll be back to you. And frankly, our adversaries are fielding very, very quickly. So it's really translating all of these islands of innovation within small companies to be able to either retrofit programs of record with new sensors, new weapons, new software, or finding how we actually reach down and pull them up, particularly looking at new business models such as services. So launch as a service, that's a great way we brought the private sector in, and that's very handy both for the department and for Congress, because you can turn that on, turn that off, and it puts the burden of development back on industry. But to answer your question specifically, we need to put more companies on contract and keep that funding going so that we get those cycles of learning. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's sort of good, better, best. Let's get a minimal viable product out there.
Absolutely, and you brought up space launch, which I think is an excellent example of how innovation can shake up defense, cause some chaos, and then ultimately result in a better outcome for the warfighter. Generally, there is a lag between the private sector and the Department of Defense, and some say that this can stem from culture and from leadership. When you were at the Pentagon, did you recognize a cultural problem there that impeded innovation, and how did that compare with your experience in industry? There
are some unique challenges in government. First of all, I think most individuals, whether they be civilians or military in uniform, they are not motivated and they are not recognized for taking risk. It's a risk-averse culture for a lot of very good reasons. Mistakes can mean lives sometimes, but I think we have put so many Band-Aids on for so many different reasons that now we've sort of paralyzed a lot of people. And you know, the media tends to jump on anything that's a problem. Unfortunately, there are not enough hearings in Congress, so you tend to have hearings on the things that went wrong versus the things that went right. So the rewards and motivations are not there for most individuals to really lean forward and take smart risks. Secondly, unlike industry, and things are not perfect in industry by any means, but individuals can get more done quickly in industry. In DC, everything's a campaign, and there are many, many stakeholders. So an analogy that I sort of worked on when I first came into government was thinking that, gee, in industry, you have a small corporate layer, and then you have operating units, and you might have 7 to 13 maybe directors on a board of directors for a public company. Well, if you step back to the Department of Defense, huge scale, huge scope, you have the military services as the operating unit and some agencies. You have the Office of the Secretary of Defense as the corporate layer. And then you have almost 550 directors on the board of directors called Congress. It just takes more time. So that's the challenge here. How do we scale quickly, taking smart risks, allowing Congress to have their oversight responsibility while motivating and rewarding the Department of Defense individuals to lean forward and take smart risks?
Yeah, absolutely. And Congressman Calvert, I'm interested in your perspective on how Congress can both contribute to a risk-adverse culture, but also maybe provide solutions to it so that the Pentagon feels more empowered to move faster.
Well, we need to encourage people to take risk. I think that has not happened in the department. They've been rewarded for not taking risk rather than, you know, there's some, I think it was Elon Musk that has, you know, the fail to succeed in his plant in Hawthorne. That they're not afraid of failure. The Kelly Johnsons of the world that designed aircraft in World War II and got it across the assembly line in 9 months, or was able to do the SR-71 in a very short period of time, or the Admiral Rickover, who was told to put together a nuclear reactor in a submarine and did it in 3 years. Could you imagine that today? No. I mean, because such risk-adverse environment in the department is that we don't reward people for taking risk, for trying to succeed. And that has to change, because in the private sector, as you know, there's many failures before there's success.
And you want to fail small, right?
That's right.
So you build up.
You know, and you know, that's just common sense to those of us that came out of the private sector. You've got to take a risk. And if you take that risk and you succeed, you got great rewards. And you mentioned space. Obviously, we had a monopoly with United Launch Alliance. We brought in SpaceX to create competition. Now I was happy to see Vulcan rocket be successful the other day, and because we want to make sure there's competition within the system. Best thing is competition.
Absolutely.
And we need that in the department also.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, great leaders definitely can make a difference in this process and in encouraging innovation. But it's no question that process plays a huge role in how innovation is actually implemented. There's requirements generation, the annual POM process, the PPBE cycle, and Congress's role, which offer up an equal number of pathways to success and failure. Luckily, there's a commission on PPBE reform that has a report coming out pretty soon, and the vice chair is here today. So, Ms. Lord, I'm interested in your perspective on why PPBE reform is needed, and should the changes be broad, targeted, some combination of the two?
Thank you. So planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, this is the process by which the department gets its money and executes against that. We have to realize that 60 years ago, this process was written. And at that point, government had the bulk of technological innovation, and they were driving it. Fast forward 60 years, now the commercial sector has the bulk of that innovation, yet our processes haven't changed to acknowledge that, so that it is difficult to buy commercial products on a relative scale. Additionally, the pace of technological innovations, as I said earlier, has sped up, and we cannot wait 2 and 3 years to go through the typical process. Now, there are Band-Aids out there. DIU, we mentioned before, the Strategic Capabilities Office, the Rapid Capabilities Offices, but these are all Band-Aids again. And what the Commission is looking at the behest of Congress, is how do we change that process, keep the good parts of it, that we have lots of people deliberating and making decisions, but make it relevant to today. So we need to speed up decision making. We need to have much more transparency in terms of data, the way we pass information back and forth between DOD and Congress and DOD is somewhat in the dark ages. We need to digitize all of this, make files searchable, sortable. We need to really have consistent communications. So there's an enormous amount we can do with this digital transparency, but also just thinking about how we actually architect the budget. So the way a person thinks about a military service, a specific segment in terms of capability, then the color of money, and we brought up the color of money earlier. It's somewhat artificial if you're developing software, for instance, and you have 3 colors of money. You have RDT&E, you have production, and then you have operations and maintenance. If you are really doing DevSecOps, if you're doing contemporary coding, you are developing, producing, and testing all in one day, and you want all of those reps and sets going on. We need to not have the administrivia of that color of money, which you have to use for each of those 3 phases to artificially hold it back. So there's enormous opportunity here. We are just drafting the final report. We'll roll it out on March 6th, and I think there's enormous opportunity for us all.
That's a Super Tuesday, just about.
Super Tuesday. Oh. Yeah, there you go.
The second biggest thing happening.
Exactly, exactly.
Congressman Calvert, I want to dig in a little bit more to the color of money issue. Your bill includes a $1 billion hedge fund for DIU, of which $650 million is colorless money. Can you tell us a little bit about how this will enable innovation while balancing your oversight responsibilities?
Well, this is going to give flexibility to Doug, who will be administering that program, Doug Beck, and to give him the ability to move that money to where it's necessary to get what's needed in the field as rapidly as possible. It's just a very simple explanation. So it's nothing more complicated than that, and we're trying to keep it simple. And there's some other monies that go to the combatant commanders to give them some flexibility to acquire things in the open market that they believe will help them. You know, obviously, I've talked to the combatant commanders. All of them have a wish list that they wish they could get to, and so we're trying to give them a little flexibility, give them the responsibility to make those decisions. They're given a lot of responsibility. There ought to be some money to go along with it. So that's where we're at, and I think hopefully with our friends in the Senate, we'll be able to pass that and have an end product hopefully soon. Yeah. Maybe by March 6th.
Hey, that would be wonderful.
And generally speaking, I'd be interested in both of your thoughts on this. We keep talking about timing and the need to prototype in field. How important is it to shift our focus from research and development to procurement, to shift the accounts, the money, but also just generally how we think about the acquisition cycle, that given the time that we're in right now?
Yeah, we have to do away with the valley of death, right, where we have these lags between. So I think we need to move from demonstrations and exercises and SBIR phase 3s, you know, across that valley of death and get going. We do have some capability administratively to do that with middle tier of acquisition and a few other things, but they're the exception, not the rule. And I think we have to have a leadership expectation, both from the building and the Hill, that we will move quickly, because we don't have a technology innovation issue in this country. We have an issue with fielding technically innovative capabilities, whether it be hardware, software, services.
I've made a few comments in the past about R&D welfare, where some folks we all love the primes and continually ask for more R&D, on and on and on until and not execute on anything. I like the Israelis. Raphael has a philosophy about deploying when it's about 70% ready to go, and then they'll fix it as it moves.
Yep.
And they want to do the same thing with Iron Beam right now. We're trying to get some money, obviously, in this, hopefully in a supplemental that will help the Israelis, and to deploy Iron Beam along with Iron Dome to perfect that technology. That's what we should be doing. We should be doing the same thing. If we have technologies that are a long ways away, but we can field it, not perfect, but field it, and perfect it as it moves along. That's some of the attitude changes we need.
So I want to shift a little bit to talk about non-traditional defense companies and their impact on the industrial base. There was a recent New York Times article suggesting a trend of retired Pentagon officials taking positions at VCs and startups, whereas before the trend was more so that they'd go to the primes and boards of that nature. We've also seen organizations like DIU and AFWERX become a lot more empowered over the past few years and funded a lot more thanks to congressional efforts. I think this is a really positive trend that we can build upon. So Congressman Calvert, I'm interested in your perspective on what role the venture-backed startup sector can play in the defense industrial base. And you've mentioned some examples, but if there's any others that you have seen.
Well, the obvious one is drone technology. I think we see this in all these recent wars in Ukraine, certainly in Israel, where the drones have changed the battlefield enormously, and the software that's attached to those drones. And so I think you're going to see a lot of small companies, a lot of venture-backed companies getting into this, not just small drones, but large drones, and for planes, for instance, that can accompany, robotic planes that can accompany our fighter planes, or robotic ships that can accompany our warships, that is a force multiplier without the cost of making a full-fledged ship that costs billions and maybe tens of millions, a fraction, but giving us that kind of capability. And there's a lot of small companies that have a lot of great ideas that I think that should be very marketable. And I think a lot of folks know that in the department, and a lot of people know that in the industry, and they're moving in that direction.
Absolutely. And you mentioned AppFit a little bit earlier. Could you maybe elaborate on some specific programs within the department that you think these VCs should look to?
Well, AppFit, again, that was a program that's Heidi Chu. We kicked it off with about $100 million. We're kicking it up a little bit higher than that, hopefully more in this FY24 bill. She's identifying certain technologies that we can field rapidly. There's been a number of things that are out there. I think 9 out of the 10 technologies that she's chosen are being deployed. I mean, they're being put to manufacturing and acquiring, especially in the software and the drone capabilities. I think those are the primary ones that she's looking at.
And Ms. Lord, are you seeing a shift in focus towards these non-traditional models and companies in the defense industrial base that has historically focused on the larger companies?
Absolutely, but we have a structural problem, just like we have with the PPBE process, where it's slow and laborious and perhaps very good for manned fighter aircraft and aircraft carriers, not so good for attritable unmanned aircraft systems. Mm-hmm. We have had a defense industrial base that has modeled itself on the Pentagon with the same number of levels and the same way of doing business, whereas those major primes are very important to U.S. national security. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. And what we need to do is find a way for the primes to pull in more of these innovative companies, but also perhaps for government, for DoD, to own that technical baseline, to do the systems engineering, look at these modular systems, understand the interface control documents so that we can switch in and switch out this innovative technology. We're in a bit of a vapor lock sometimes now where everybody sees the opportunity yet integrating a new component is so onerous from a cost, technical complexity, and time point of view. We don't get it done, and we wait to the next version of the aircraft, the plane, the weapon, whatever it is. We need to get much more agile because the defense industrial base needs to include all of these companies, but they need a way in. And I know, for instance, National Academies right now is doing a study on the reauthorization of the SBIR and SITR process, saying how can they pull more of these companies across. There are opportunities to do this, but it takes basically DOD working closely with Congress so everyone understands what are the inhibitors and what are the enablers.
So it seems like the shift, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is largely being driven by these companies wanting to work with the Department of Defense and the department just needing to change its processes, or is the government forcing the change as well?
You know, DOD is a pretty hard organization to penetrate. When I went into DOD after 33 years in government, I knew I didn't know a lot about how the government worked. I realized I knew nothing about how it worked. And so for the average individual to get in there is hard. And I think that's why, thank goodness, we have all of these senior officials coming out of DOD and working with private equity and working with venture capital to kind of be the translator and the connector. And what we have to do is have enough people in the Department of Defense with business experience, with business acumen, to understand what it takes to pull these companies in that can translate to those who are fabulous in terms of their military knowledge and the workings of government, but don't understand the language and the mechanisms to work with industry in a mutually beneficial way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to conclude today's panel with a forward-looking question. In the past 2 years, we've seen a pretty rapid deterioration of the security environment with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Israel and Hamas and their conflict, Iran and its proxy actions in the Red Sea, and the enduring potential of China invading Taiwan in the next couple of years. All these factors together mean that this year's budget, the fiscal year 2025 budget that is, will be hugely consequential in terms of getting these innovative next generation capabilities into warfighters' hands in a manner in which they can use them in future conflicts. So I'm interested from both of you, of all the items we've discussed today, what are you most hopeful and excited for to be incorporated to scale these solutions that we've worked on the past few years and get these capabilities into the hands of warfighters?
Maybe I'll go first because you're the one with the pen and can really make a difference, so you should close this out. I look at this in 3 buckets. One, from a product point of view, what do we need? We need what the Congressman mentioned in Replicator, Kath Hicks projects, where we have large numbers of attritable unmanned systems, whether they be aircraft systems, whether they be surface, subsurface, or terrestrial. We just really need to fund that, and quantity has a quality all of its own. Ukraine has especially shown us what can be done there. So I'd say that is huge. Secondly, from a domain point of view, I'm extremely concerned about space. It's a contested environment. It's a confusing environment because there's so much commercially happening there. And I think, unfortunately, the average American doesn't realize that our national security and our economic security are incredibly intertwined, and space allows a lot of our economy to function. So I think we need to double down and really resource space. And finally, I think we have to pay attention to business systems. We typically do not fund business systems for the Department of Defense, and we've fallen way behind. And that's not only a cybersecurity threat and a variety of other things, it's impeding Congress and DOD to work quickly together with data transparency, with communication, and all the rest.
Great. Congressman Calvert.
I agree with everything you've said. I think the Replicator program is a good example of something that can be successful or not successful. We got to find out exactly what we're going to fund, that it's a scalable endeavor, whatever we pick, and that we fund it. And so hopefully those decisions are going to be made soon. That could start in FY24, and obviously FY25 would finalize that, and as such as that we would get these systems online as soon as possible. The threat is real. It's now really. China today is moving ships in the Strait, and there's an election on Saturday. This program will probably be showing. We'll probably find out what happened in Taiwan, but these are threats that are real and now, and so we need to move quickly to get these systems online as fast as possible. You mentioned business systems. The Pentagon still does payroll the way they were doing payroll 50 years ago. I think that's reflective of the entire, obviously, enterprise. And so it's the largest enterprise on the planet. And that's why I'm hopeful that they bring in, it's not just people leaving the Pentagon and going to the private sector. We need people from the private sector coming into the Pentagon.
Absolutely.
And to change the culture there, to say, look, we don't need to be doing our payroll. I mean, we can contract that out to whoever, and we can contract a lot of things and get focused on what's important. And what's important right now is the procurement process and fixing it, and personnel and fixing that. And so those are the two big P's that I've been focused on and will continue to be focused on as we try to change the culture in the Department of Defense.
Great. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. So thank you, Congressman Calvert. Thank you, Ms. Lord, for your time today. And thank you to the America's Future National Security Virtual Summit for empowering us to have this conversation today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Bryn. Appreciate it.
Appreciate
thank you,
your time.
Okay, thank you.
All right.